This interview is a part of the Oral History Project sponsored by the State Bar of New Mexico and the Senior Lawyers Division. I'm Rick Kraft. I'm a member of the Senior Lawyers Division Board conducting an interview of Judge Bobby Baldock. The interview is being conducted at the law offices of Kraft Law Firm here in Roswell, New Mexico. I'm honored to be able to ask questions of Judge Bobby Baldock. He's one of my heroes. Good morning.
Morning, Rick.
We're glad that you've taken time to be with us here today on behalf of the Senior Lawyers Division and the State Bar, and look forward to visiting with you and hearing your story. And your story started in your younger years. Can you tell me maybe a little bit about where you were born and your growing up years, please?
Well, thanks, Rick, for even asking me to come do this. I'm kind of humbled by it, but I was born in a little town that no longer exists, as my understanding, in Rocky, Oklahoma, in 1936, January 24th. Actually, the town that I lived in Oklahoma until I was 10 years old was a community called Mangum, Oklahoma, and that's where both my mother and father were from.
And when did you leave Oklahoma then?
When I was 10 years old, we moved to Roswell, so that was about 1945 or 46.
Wow. So that's almost 80 years ago.
It's a
Yeah.
few.
And did you have any brothers or sisters? Or?
I have one sister, Paula. She's 9 years younger than I am. I keep thinking of her as very young, but then I think, okay, at my age, 9 years, she's an old lady.
Well, we're putting an age on you, I guess, if someone runs the numbers. But so, except for your time when you went to Albuquerque, we'll come back to that when you served on the bench, Court of Appeals. But other than that, have you lived in Roswell? Well, you went off to law school too, I guess.
Yes, well,
But
actually, my father came here and was working for the old Kemp Lumber Company, which was a large company out of lumber yard out of Texas. But then we moved from here over to Lovington for 2 months because the manager of that lumber yard died.
Huh.
Well, in the meantime, my mother wasn't too thrilled about that. But then the manager of the Kemp Lumber Company in Hagerman died, and that was more suitable where she wanted. So I lived in Hagerman from the time I was in the 5th grade through the 8th grade, and then moved back to Roswell. We were here in Roswell, went my freshman year, my sophomore year, my junior year. I moved to Casa Grande, Arizona. My parents, well, actually it was Maricopa, Arizona. My parents bought a business there. Graduated from high school from Casa Grande, Arizona. Came back to New Mexico Military Institute on basketball scholarships and finished there in 1956.
okay, what position did you play in basketball?
Well, we were not a real tall team, and we were at my sophomore year. The institute had gone from a 4-year college back to a junior college, so we were playing senior college, and so we were all the same size. So just wherever you came down the court, that's where you played.
Okay. I've known you for years. First time I ever heard that. So now, anything about your childhood that jumps out at you? Any important event or anything that changed the direction of your world, or you just had a standard childhood like most of the rest of us?
No, I had a wonderful mother and father. I had a great childhood, and I love this valley, Hagerman, Dexter, Roswell. It's the kind of community I tell, and I think I may have told you this. If you'll support the community ends up supporting you as a lawyer, and it has never failed in all these years that we've lived here.
Yeah. So you graduated from the institute.
Yes.
Had you met your wife yet?
Yes. We started dating at the end of my freshman year in college. You have to realize I was a good athlete, and I was also an arrogant athlete, and my wife could not stand me because of that. And how I won her over, I don't know, but I did.
And now, I want to come back later and talk a little about that. So after graduating from the institute, what did you do?
We got married 4 days after I graduated
Wow.
from junior college, and then we both went to the University of Arizona.
And I saw that I've introduced you many times, and I was looking back at your resume. I was wondering why you chose Arizona, coming out of Roswell.
Well, that was where we were going to be residents of, and we were going to save. Arizona, even back in those days, was expensive, so out-of-state tuition was expensive. But my residence was still the residence of my parents, and when we got married, Spunky's residence became mine.
Uh-huh.
So it was a bonus for us from that standpoint.
And how many years did you go to school there?
4 years.
And what was your major?
History. That was, and my undergraduate was political science and Spanish. Okay. And I went through law school on the joint degree in 6 years instead of the 7 years. So my first year in law school counted as my last year in undergrad. Uh-huh. So that's how I was able to accumulate enough hours for both.
And so your law degree was from University of Arizona.
Yes.
Also. Mm-hmm. It's ironic because I did the same thing.
Yeah.
I went through in 6 years. So you, anything from your college days, you were married, you said, to Spunky? Anything that jumps out that impacted your life in a major way? Or?
Well, Major Miller, who was actually my counselor at the Institute, called me in one day. I thought I was in trouble, but I wasn't. And we just had a visit because he was asking me, what was my thinking as to what I wanted to do. And I told him, I said, well, there's 3 things I know, or there's 2 things that I know I can do for sure. I know I can coach and teach school because I'm an athlete and enjoyed that. I know that I could be a farmer or rancher because my uncle, my mother's brother, was a very large farmer in Arizona. And I also knew that I could go into the grocery business because that's where my parents were. But I said I kind of thought maybe about law school. And he said, well, you just thought about it? I said, yeah, because I don't know whether I can do it. And this is the advice that he gave me, and it stayed with me all these years. He said, Bobby, if you don't try, you don't know. And he said, if you try and you don't make it, at least when you're 42 years old, you're not going to have a major crisis in life because at least you tried it. But he says, if you don't try it, when you get into your mid-40s, you're going to have a midlife crisis because you'll be thinking, what if? And so that's when I decided, okay, I'm going to go to law school, or I'm going to try to go to law school.
And that was before you started at Arizona?
Yes.
Wow.
That was my sophomore year at the Institute, my second year in college.
Did you think that when you went to Arizona that you'd continue after undergrad to law school there also, or?
Oh yes, because that's when we geared my second year at the Institute academics toward being able to get through on the 6 year. And that's another interesting story of how things really work, because when I went there, Arizona was only going to classify me as a freshman, and that was not going to work. So Major Miller and whoever, I forgot who it was at the University of Arizona, copied the books that we used at the Institute. They were the same one that was used in Arizona. So I got, instead of having to repeat my sophomore year, I got my full credit. Well, I got every credit except for 2 hours, because at Arizona, minoring in Spanish was 4 credit hours, and at the Institute it was 2.
Wow.
So
wow.
I had to at least make up those 2 hours.
So I gave you a head start.
Yes.
Now, so when you and Spunky married, she knew that you were going to try for law school?
Yes. Yeah. And she and I both, she finished, of course, she went 4 years undergrad while I went my last year in undergrad and the next 3 years in law school.
And what was her degree in?
Education.
Okay.
So majoring in history.
And so are there any lawyers anywhere in your family tree?
None.
Okay. Again, my journey is the same. And is there anything? I mean, when you ask Major Miller about trying for law, I mean, is there any event that motivated you, or I mean, you just thought that'd be fun to do? There was,
No, his pep talk with me inspired me enough to I cannot tell you, Rick, how much I feel like I owe the Institute.
uh-huh.
When I went there, I was an athlete, good enough to think that you owed me my grades. I really didn't have to work for them. And what a rude awakening that was. The first 9-week card that I got, my scholarship was in jeopardy already because,
Wow.
you know, I enjoyed the Institute, but didn't enjoy the classes. And so it took a whole different mindset for me to begin to understand, hey, look, you earn what you get in this life. It's not given to you. So,
Did in law school you said, did you do that? You overlapped a year, so you had 3 years of law school, but overlapped with undergrad.
right.
Okay. Anything in law school that jumps out at you? Any class, any professor, anything? So at some point you made a decision where to go after law school, and you maybe.
I loved law school. I mean, it was the most challenging thing. I just, everything about it, I just soaked it up. And my professors, they were outstanding. I had one professor, which was nice. He spoke in a very soft voice. And so it depended on where you were seated in his class. There was a direct correlation with your grade. If you were in the front row, chances were you were going to make an A or a B.
Wow.
If you were in the third row back, chances were you were going to be a C. Anything behind that, you better hope you could pass the course. But it was, I loved every bit of it.
And what year did you graduate then from law school?
1960.
And at that point, did you come back to Roswell?
No.
Oh, okay.
I interviewed in Casa Grande, Arizona. And again, Rick, it was one of those things, you know, when you're in school, I had one suit and one white tie, one white shirt and a tie. And my interview was set up in early June in Casa Grande. It was set up for 11 o'clock in the morning, which was 80 miles from Tucson. I got in the car and I looked spiffy and I drove to, we didn't have air conditioning in my car, and I drove to Casa Grande. When I got there, I was wringing wet because it was already over 100 degrees. I looked like I had slept in my suit and my shirt. And I go in and the receptionist said, well, they're in deposition. Can you come back about 2 o'clock? And I said, I think I can. So I went out and got back in the car, took my coat off. I'm sitting there and I thought, okay, have I had enough of Arizona heat, and what will Spunky think? Because I think I want to go back to Roswell. So I went home, I told her, she lit up like a Christmas tree. She called immediately Mr. Schinkel, who was the superintendent of our school, because when I was at the Institute, she had kind of been his secretary. She got hired that day.
Wow. Wow. At the Institute.
I didn't even have a job, but we moved back to Roswell. But that's how I got back to Roswell.
So when you, so you came back to Roswell without a job,
Yes.
but with a law degree.
Mm-hmm.
And so what happened next?
Well, let's see. I got 2 interviews. I personally went in with my same suit but a clean white shirt. I went into the Hinkle firm and I went into the Sanders firm. Now with Truman, the Sanders firm was Sanders and Bruin, just the 2 of them. And but the Hinkle firm was still a large firm still even then. And so the Hinkle firm set up an interview for me like 2 or 3 days because a couple of the people that did the interviewing were not available. So I go the next day I go to the Sanders firm, and I go in, and Miss Mickey, who saved my life many a time, but anyway, she went in and told him I was there, and so uh, Jim came out and I went in and he interviewed me, but Mr. Sanders wasn't there. So I go out and I sit down and I wait and I wait. Truman doesn't show up. We break for lunch. I come back and I wait and I wait. And about 2:30 in the afternoon, Jim, with this dry sense of humor, Jim walks out of his office and he sees me sitting there and he says, "Are you still here?" And I said, "Yes, sir." So about that time, Truman comes walking in, and he says, he had forgotten, I know what, but he takes me into his office, and he asked me, he says, "Now, I told, he knew a little bit about my background, just like what we're talking, and he told me, he said, 'Now, you need a job.' I said, 'Yes, sir, Mr. Sanders, I need a job.' And he said, 'Well, let me show you where your office is going to be.'"
On the spot.
And he took me into a room much like this that had a library table. And he said, "Now this is your desk." And it was the library table, the same one that you've seen.
Yeah.
And so, and I was my own secretary. I had my own typewriter, the
Wow.
old. But he got me, just that quick.
Wow.
I had a job. So I called the Hinkle firm and I canceled my interview with them because I wanted the job.
Well, Jim Bruin was later saying to roasted you that you just showed up one day.
Yeah. and that's where that comment.
I'd never heard the full story, but
Well, he had an expletive, instead of "Are you still here?"
Yeah. So they put you on the payroll.
That right then. Put me on the payroll.
This was like 1960.
Yep, 1960. It was in July of 1960.
Okay, now you were there until 1983, right? So about 23 years.
Well, off and on.
Oh, okay.
Because right after I got hired, I got drafted.
Oh,
Because
okay.
originally,
Wow.
I had applied to go into JAG.
Okay.
And the way the draft worked, if you had a deferment, you were deferred until you graduated.
Uh-huh.
But the moment that you graduated, your name went to the top
Wow.
of the draft list. Not
Wow.
just any, it went to the top. You were going to be the next person.
Huh.
So I got my draft notice because I turned JAG down.
Uh-huh.
And so Truman grabs me and he says, "You come with me." So the National Guard Armory was about over here where the old Security Bank was. So we go in there, and Truman tells them I need to join.
Oh, wow.
So
Uh-huh.
so I'm in the National Guard, which then they immediately send me to Fort Ord, California for 6 months of basic,
Wow.
which then I came back and everything. Then we had the Cuban Missile Crisis. And I told Spunky, I said, the firm has kept me on and kept me in a job all the time that I went through basic training. But I said, if I have to go in back into the Army and get called up, they can't wait 2 years. So that point, she and I decided that if I got called up, that we would make the Army a career.
Okay.
And that's how that happened.
So how long did you serve? You said 6 months in California?
I was 6 months in California, then I was in the National Guard for 10 years, from 1961 to 1971, I believe it was.
But that was limited service. I mean, you were still practicing
Yeah,
law.
oh yeah, I'm still
Okay.
practicing law, but I'm also in the National Guard and make their monthly meetings and do summer camp and things like
And
that.
Mr. Sanders and Mr. Bruin were okay with that?
Oh yeah,
Understood.
Yeah,
They're just happy to have you.
yeah. Well, they seem to be. But each year my vacation was the time I was in summer camp.
Wow, wow. Now, during that time, like in the 60s or into the 70s, any stories of practicing law? I mean, as a young attorney, or any cases you have that kind of jump out that come to the top of your memory?
Well, you have to, and I don't know, but Judge Reese was my mentor.
Uh-huh.
And to this day, that's the basis of how my judgeship works.
Wow.
He had a saying, which is absolutely the truth. There's only two things that cause a bad docket to be backed up. He says it's lazy judges and lazy lawyers.
Okay.
So when he was elected, the entire 5th Judicial District had to show up. You had Gene Willis take all the case files, and we were all there. I mean, everybody had to show. And so he goes through the docket, calls each case. The lawyers had to respond, tell him where they were, and without asking him, he set that case for trial.
Wow.
So within a matter of 2 or 3 weeks after that, more than half of that docket settled. But he was no nonsense.
Now, did he sit in Roswell or?
Yeah, he was here in Roswell.
Okay, for the whole, at that time, how many judges do we have in the 5th District?
We had 3.
3,
We
okay.
had Judge Nash over in Hobbs, or over in Lovington, Judge Anderson down in Carlsbad, and Judge Reese here.
And did you do a lot of litigation then?
Not initially,
Uh-huh.
but at the time, one of the greatest things that happened to me legally was the fact that Mr. Sanders was going through some really tough times in his life, and Mr. Bruin, who had changed his registration, got elected to the New Mexico Senate,
Mhm.
which meant that then I took over most all of the work in the office, and you know what it is to be one single practitioner though, but with a lot of work.
Yeah.
And so that was the beginning of my really trying cases and representing people, because fast forwarding when I went on the federal district court bench, the few years that I was there, I never had a case on the court that I had not had some experience with during the 23 years that I practiced law.
Wow. Was most of your practice in state court then, or?
Yes.
Okay.
Very little federal.
And was most of it in southeast New Mexico?
Yes. Well, everything in the southern part, from Clovis all the way to past Carlsbad, and from Doñana, or from Las Cruces to the border.
And was there any area of law that you practiced more so than any other? Or?
No, that was the other neat thing about it. As a lawyer in those days and time, you just had to be able to do a little bit of all of it.
Mhm.
And that meant you spent a lot of time researching to bring yourself up to speed to do it, because we represented banks, the savings and loan, lots of farmers and ranchers. We did lots of water work, lots of insurance, defense insurance work. So from that standpoint, both workman's comp and liability. So from that standpoint, I really had a broad background.
So you're the new kid on the block for quite a while.
Yeah.
When did then you had someone join under you at some point? Was that Chuck Call?
Yeah, well,
Or-
no, before Chuck was Damon Richards, I believe. And then also before Chuck, all right.
I think Chuck joined first, and then Mike Worley maybe. When I
well,
joined the firm in '82.
Right.
Yeah.
That's the way that, as far as just people, there were short time
Uh-huh.
people that came in.
Uh-huh.
But then Chuck was the next person, and then Mike Worley was the person after him.
Now,
And then you.
yeah, I came in '82. Your name is on my certificate moving my admissions. So I'm honored to have that. And I remember when I joined that firm, the firm was at the J.P. White building. Is that where the firm had been located for?
Oh yeah, the whole time I was there. Now they did remodel the J.P. White building. Let's see, I started in I think in 1963 they remodeled it. We moved from the second floor to the third floor, and that's where we were when you came in.
Yeah. And so any case that you had that jumps out at you? I mean, any trial that you did, or it all kind of runs together.
Well, the case that I remember most is one of the most unusual fact situations. I was seated in my library behind, and Mr. Sanders brings, and I'm not going to mention the name because I'm sure they still have family here, brought in a gentleman, and Mr. Sanders knew him and told him that I was going to be able to take care of whatever legal needs that he needed. And we sat down and we visited, and you know how you do. Most people think you're just friendly, but you're testing the memory and the mental acuity of the person you're talking with to make sure you can form some decision about that. And finally we got around and I asked him, I said, now, what can I do for you? He said, I need a copyright. And I said, well, we don't do much, copyright or patent work, but tell me. And I said, I could either find you somebody. He said, yes. He says, I need the copyright, como se llama? And I said, excuse me? He said, I need a copyright on como se llama. And he said, and I also need a copyright on supposed. And I said, supposed. I said, well, supposedly that's probably already been taken and you can't copyright that. It's been. He said, well, see, I told you I needed a copyright. You've already used the word. So I explained to him that we could not do that.
Uh-huh.
And he graciously left. And I told Mr. Sanders about it, and he said, okay, well, not much happened after that. About a month later, there was a knock on my door because you could come into our library off of the main hallway without going in to see Miss Mickey. So he knocks on the door, and I open it, and there he is. And he's got a pot with rocks in it and a plastic flower. And he tells me, he comes in, and I'm very suspicious of what he's holding. And I ask finally, what can I do for you? He said, I need a patent. I said, okay, what for? And he said, I grew this from a flower.
Oh, no. Oh, no.
Bless his heart. I mean, he was really, really a nice, sweet man.
Uh-huh.
And so I told him, well, as he already knew, he couldn't have it because he already had one.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Well, I told Mr. Sanders about that after he left. Well, it was quite a while. I don't remember. But again, there was a knock on the door. And I opened the door, and there he stood with a double-bladed axe, with an axe handle. And I just reached out and put both hands on that axe so that if we were going to wrestle, and I figured he was elderly, that I could handle the axe. But he needed a patent on the double-bladed axe. Well, right before he came in, I heard a lot of kind of semi-running down the hallway.
Uh-huh.
Well, that was my office vacated. So anyway, bless his heart. That I'm not going to tell the last part of the story, but
Pretty colorful.
Yeah. But that was before. I mean, that was early on. One of the first things that
Back in
Mr.
the
Sanders
60s.
said I was going to take care of it.
Well, I want to ask you some questions about becoming a judge and such. Before I do that, let me ask you about your family, because you've been married how many years?
68 years, right?
Yeah, which is just totally amazing.
Oh, she's put up with me a long time.
Yeah, and you said her name is Spunky.
Her name is Spunky. Well, her actual name is Mary Jane, but she was given the name of Spunky when she was, just teeny. And it's one of those, that's why people need to be careful about giving nicknames to people, because occasionally they stick. And with Spunky, because it fit her personality, so it stuck. And I have never introduced her as my wife, Mary Jane. This is my wife, Spunky. So she's known everywhere as Spunky.
And you've got children?
Yes, have two sons. Robert Jennings, who's with American Airlines. He's always flown. And I have then my younger son is Christopher, who is the manager of well, not going to get into any you know, touting anything, but he's the manager of a store here in town.
Okay. So let me move back to becoming a judge. I mean, when did you first think that you might want to serve as a judge?
You know, Spunky and I had talked about that, and I'm trying to remember. It was before my 55th birthday because we the question began, but it was close to it. Well, no, it wasn't close to my 55th birthday, but I had been practicing law probably about 20 years at that time. And if you'll recall, when you came on, I had told you, I said, now, if you're coming into this firm because of me, because I have a sense that I'm not going to be here that long. I didn't know what was going on in my life, but something was going on.
Mm-hmm.
And Spunky and I had talked about it because the practice of law here in Raleigh had been extremely good to us. And we got to thinking, okay, what about and what if? And so we had talked about it to the point where I had said, okay, and when I get to be 55 years of age, I'm going to step aside from the actual practice of law, and I will either try to become a professor at a law school, or I might want to run as a state district court judge, but I would prefer to teach. And she was absolutely 100%, in favor of that. And then shortly so I had to have been in my 40s, because shortly after that is when we heard that Judge Meacham had taken senior status, and that a federal district court position had opened up. And I told Spunky, I said, I think maybe I'm supposed to try for that. So that's the story behind that.
Yeah. Let me, I forgot to ask you about your teaching. You brought up that point because you did teach at the university.
Yes, I taught for, let's see, it was either 18 or 19 years, I believe, out at Eastern.
And what did you teach there?
Business law.
Okay, and you enjoyed that?
Oh, yeah. That's why I really felt like that's what I wanted to do, was to teach law school.
I've got down from 62 to 81.
Yes, that would be right.
So so now there's a federal spot open. I joined the firm in '82,
Mm-hmm.
And you interviewed with the rest of them. You're the one that brought me to Roswell. I've been here 42 years now. Yeah.
Occasionally I do something right.
But obviously that had a big impact on my life. But when I came in the fall of '82, I remember you saying that you were putting your name in for a judgeship.
Yeah.
And you just skipped over the state judgeship and all that. You went straight for the federal, it sounds like.
Right.
You'd never ran for a position other than previously to what happened with the federal court.
I got my wife to run for the school board. She
Uh-huh.
was there for 6 years, and I think she almost killed me because she was really good at it. But I'm telling you, she had to work hard at it. So
Now, to become a federal judge, it was an appointment?
yes,
And
by the president.
Yeah, and the president at that time was?
President Reagan.
Yeah. And I remember a call in the first couple of months of '83 from, they said, President Reagan is on the phone.
That's correct.
And you put him on a speaker.
Yes.
And I remember him talking with you. And what was that like to talk to the President of the United States?
It was exciting, but Rick, we have to step back because during the time that I practiced law, I also became fairly involved in politics, not running for things, but helping people get elected. And in 1976, the year that President Reagan then was attempting to unseat, President Ford. Well, I don't even remember how I got there, but I became this chairman of President Reagan's a bid for presidency in 1976, and I was in charge of the whole state.
Wow.
Well, Art